Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development Interview Series. My name is Michael Clark. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm a past president of the CCA, managing director at Agilis based out in Denver, Colorado. I'm really excited for my guest today. My guest on today's episodes is Dave Dillon. Dave's a senior vice president and principal at Lewis Ellis in Dallas, Texas. Dave's a former member of the board of directors at the Society of Actuaries, where he received the SOA's Presidential Award last year in 2022. He's also recently coming off being the runner-up for the position of president-elect in the most recent SOA elections. A couple of other interesting tidbits about Dave before we get started. He has his own podcast through the SOA. It's called the HSC Educational Podcast Series. You can find that on the SOA's podcast site. He is also a board member of the National Math Foundation. He's a prolific writer. He writes periodic articles that he publishes on his LinkedIn profile, primarily on the topic of healthcare. We're going to talk more about those today. But Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for having me.
So before we get into this, the National Math Foundation, talk to us a little bit about that. That's an interesting one that I hadn't heard of before.
Yeah, so it may sound a little bigger than it is, but it is still fascinating to me. So Susie Kuntz is I'll say former actuary. She was trained actuary that had the fantastic idea of starting an organization to help kids learn math. And it's primarily kids in lower income areas, may not have a whole lot of family support. But the also interesting dynamic with it is it's all based on kinesthetic learning. So so Susie has gone in and helps teachers with different math programs. And a lot of it is, you might think of it as like kind of those old school gym mats, and it might look like kind of a hopscotch type thing. And so the kids do math problems while they're bouncing around and hopping around on the mat. And there's been all these studies that show that it really reinforces the math way easier, way better than kind of rote memorization and stuff like that. So Susie asked me to help be an advisor on the board 5 or 6 years ago, and it has been a fascinating experience. And that organization is really growing and reaching out to new schools. It has been primarily in the New York area, but they've got some recent collaborations with the University of Seattle and other universities to kind of help expand that. So yeah, it's a little different program, but it's really fascinating to see it kind of work in practice.
Oh, that's very cool. Sounds like a great organization. And if people are interested, where can they check out what you're doing with that organization?
Yeah, so I believe the website's as easy as the nationalmathfoundation.org. You can also find some information at Susie's, I'll say, commercial company that's related to that, called Math and Movement. And I believe that's at mathandmovement.com. So yeah, check out those two organizations. I think on the board right now, out of about 9 people, I think there's 3 actuaries. Obviously, a lot of us are very committed to the math field and helping younger folks. So if there are more people interested, we'd love to have you.
That's cool. That's great. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Dave, as we get into our podcast today and our interview today, I wanted, just so that people can get to know you a little bit better, talk to us a bit about your career path.
Yeah, so my career path might be, maybe everyone says theirs is a little different from everyone else's, but so I grew up in the great state of Oklahoma, not a whole lot of actuarial.
Not a hotbed for actuarial.
Yeah,
programs.
there's not an actuarial. There's a smaller university in my hometown that has a nice program now, but when I was growing up, it really wasn't a program. In reality, there's only one employer of actuaries in the state of Oklahoma, and that's American Fidelity Group. And I mentioned that. So my dad was an insurance agent. So he worked for American Fidelity. That's how we got to Oklahoma, got transferred down there. And my dad learned early and I learned early, I was good in math early, like a lot of actuaries. And my dad introduced me to his chief actuary when I was 13 years old. And so I'm one of the few people that I was like, man, I'm fascinated. This is great. Business job, use my math skills, that kind of thing. So I kind of knew pretty early. So I went in, got a true math degree like a lot of actuaries do. And then I did get some actuarial. I got my graduate degree at University of Iowa. His Oklahoma State, where I went to undergrad, did not have much in the way of just true actuarial kind of prep classes or things like that. And so I did decide early. I will say, a little bit of the wrinkle I had and some of the hurdles I had, I may not have been the best exam taker earlier in my career. So I didn't have as many exams as a lot of my classmates, and I didn't have the overwhelming, 5 offers like a lot of people had. A lot of the offers I had were, in very small companies, very small areas. I think I remember the first offer I got was in Hollicong, Pennsylvania, which I had never heard of before. And I held out to try to find. I'll be honest, when I lived in Iowa, I froze. It was a little too cold for me. So I swore I would never live north of Mason-Dixon again. And so I held out, and I got there weren't, as many actuaries know, there's not as many jobs in the South as there are in the Midwest and the Northeast. So
Mhm.
it took a little while. But I found a job with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arkansas. So I kind of, and I'll be honest, I did not choose the health practice. It kind of, health world, it kind of chose me, right? It was a job in the South. I was like, let's do it. It wasn't far from Oklahoma. Because I should mention, while there was that one employer in Oklahoma, they had a nepotism rule. And since my dad worked there, I could not work for the only employer basically in the state of Oklahoma. So that's how I got started in the health field. And we can talk later about my career in the health field, but that's kind of how I got started. Was I kind of knew early, had a few challenges finding kind of the position I wanted due to my early challenges on the exams. But as I always I think as I always say, it doesn't necessarily how you get there. It's where it's where you are, and I'm where I want to be.
So you worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield for a little bit, but you didn't stay
Yep.
there, right? You ended
Yeah,
up.
I'll be honest. I met a girl, and
All good stories start that way.
yeah, and she my now wife. I'll start with the conclusion. She was also in a very small field. She was a rehab teacher for the blind. There aren't many cities where you can find jobs for an actuary and a rehab teacher for the blind. And she moved to Dallas, and I had to make the decision: was I going to pursue this further or not? I decided I was. Um, Moved down to Dallas chasing her. There were 2 job, Dallas also does not have a whole lot of opportunities in reality. Um, Lewis and Ellis had an opening. I'll be honest, I had no clue. I'd never heard of Lewis and Ellis before. It was a relatively small consulting firm at the time, but maybe it's a little bit of being, as I always joke, half agent, because my dad was an agent. I've got some entrepreneurial sales skills somewhere in me. And I took the Lewis and Ellis job. So yeah, I was at Blue Cross for about 3 years. And then I've been at Lewis and Ellis. Actually, my next anniversary, which is right around Valentine's Day of 2024, will be 25 years. So it's
Wow,
kind of crazy to think about.
that's awesome! Congratulations. That's
Yeah,
a huge
thank you.
accomplishment. And I like how you said that it was the health practice area found you more than you finding it. Now so you've worked in health the whole time. You worked at an insurer for those early years, and then moving over to Lewis and Ellis, which is a consulting firm, kept you in that health space, but not obviously on the provider side. Now on the consulting side, what do you like about working as a health actuary? Clearly, you've liked it enough. You've stuck with it for a quarter of a century now.
Yeah, I think it's funny is, I took that job because it was available, but in hindsight, I think being a health actuary, the health discipline was the right fit for me for various reasons. I actually was joking this week. I'm also an instructor for the Academy's Life and Health Qualification Seminar. And when we do that, the audience is a mix of life and health actuaries.
Hmm.
And as I tell them, and I usually joke that I think a lot of the health actuarial stuff is easier. So maybe that's why I like it so much. But because it's shorter term, right? There's not as a lot of long-term hardcore math, maybe, but I think that's what I like about it, in that because it's shorter term, there's a lot more nuance in my,
Hmm.
and there's a lot more change. So that has been one of the fascinating things for me in my career, is I never thought I'd have to kind of like dabble in politics. Because a lot of what I do is Affordable Care Act, health policy type stuff. And so I think that's one of the reasons I've really liked the health actuarial world, is the rules change all the time. So you got to be, kind of on your feet. You have to be somebody that can be adept at changes and things like that. So, I'll be honest, early in my career, it was kind of scary, right? You're like, I think a lot of actuaries kind of like formulas, right? We like the process. And in the health world, you do have to get used to a lot of changing rules. I was given an example the other day, with the Affordable Care Act, there's short-term medical policies. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say I think short-term medical policies since 2010 have had 5 different sets of rules. And
Wow.
so, if you write those policies or you help clients with that, you have to, know not only the rules and how they change for that type of policy, but those types of policies impact the decisions consumers make on other policies and things like that.
Crazy. No, that's great. Now on our podcast, we've talked to a lot of people that have been career changers, people that either switched practice areas or they've switched companies multiple times. But based on what you told us, that's clearly not you. I mean, coming up on 25 years with Lewis and Ellis. Talk to us about your experience at essentially working for the same company almost your entire career.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I've been able to do that, because I don't know if I ever would have thought I could do that. And I'll back up a little bit to the Blue Cross and Blue Shield experience. And while I left, not necessarily for work reasons, they did at the time pretty much tell me I was going to become a reserving actuary, and that's all I was going to do, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I could have lasted at a company for 25 years just doing one thing. So I do think the nature of my company and being a consultant has allowed me to, it's almost like working for a big company that has, internal rotation programs, right?
Hmm.
Even in my younger career, when I couldn't necessarily choose the projects or the type of clients I wanted to work on, it was so varied and so different. I think that's what has allowed me to work so long at one company. Is I dabble in a little bit of valuation. I do quite a bit of pricing. I do a lot of regulatory work. I always joke at L&E, we don't necessarily have specialists, but we do all have leanings. And so
Hmm.
I've got 2 or 3 leanings that I kind of have a lot of clients in. But I'm also free to work on anything else. And I think that is what has really gotten me to work for somebody for so long.
Well, and that I think that probably speaks volumes too about your employer, right? I don't think every employer is necessarily the same either. So that's great that you've been able to find that at Lewis and Ellis, the ability to do all of those different things and find some career satisfaction there.
Yeah, I will have to, yeah, definitely give everyone I've worked for over the years at Lewis and Ellis and worked with. I mean, we do pride ourselves, we have a lot of people that have worked there a long time. I was joking with someone, Glenn Tobelman has been there over 40 years this year. And 25 years ago, they did some hiring, Glenn and Scott Gibson, who's been over there for 35 years. They hired 3 of us within a 3 to 4 month period, and we're all hitting our 25th
Wow.
anniversary right now. So we tend to stick around. You know,
So they're clearly doing something right over there. What do you attribute that to?
I do think a lot of it was probably a perfect storm of being a smaller company, and then you start hiring in, and you're kind of in it together, kind of a deal, right? You're kind of trying to build the company together right? So, I'm trying to, when I was hired, I was the first non-credentialed health analyst hired at Lewis and Ellis. The health practice was pretty small. We had a couple FSAs. And so I think it was a lot of the just again being in the deep end together,
Mhm.
learning how to swim together in terms of trying to build the practice, build the firm. Right now the health practice, we probably have, maybe slightly exaggerating, but I don't think too much. I think we have about 25 to 30 credentialed health actuaries now with about 40 students. So,
Wow.
we've grown from 3 FSAs and one little old student and me to that level. And I just think and it was a lot of the kind of that family atmosphere as well. Have been a very close-knit group.
So, over the course of 25 years, things have to change, especially as you go through that growth. So what do you attribute that ability to maintain that culture where everybody feels like they're in it together over that period of time and going through all that growth? I mean, going from 3 credentialed actuaries to now somewhere closer to 10 times that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some learning curves and some growing pains and things like that. I do again. I think it's the commitment level of the consultants you hire. Some people may not like the consulting world, but we've had great success. I think it's the ability to. I think a lot of it was based on the entrepreneurial spirit, but then working to grow, and then but working with others to make sure that growth makes sense. I think that you do have to learn. I think where a lot of the kind of the growing pains are is when you get to, we're now, 110 employees, let's say. And so we're, medium to upper medium, we're one of the, larger actuarial consulting firms, but we're still not huge, right? So
Mhm.
some of the issues we deal with now are more of, I'll call the infrastructure issues, right? So when you're smaller, you can kind of do whatever you want, but then when you start having 100 or more employees, you have to build that infrastructure, and that has been a little bit of the challenge. But you know what? We faced it so far, and we look forward to keep doing it.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think there's a lot of good things that our listeners will be able to take away from that as well, just in terms of growing a successful business from the ground up, essentially. So Dave, you also write a bunch of topics on healthcare and the actuarial profession. We alluded to this in your intro. Many of those articles I mentioned are on your LinkedIn profile if people want to check them out, which I highly recommend they do. Talk to us about your experience writing these pieces. Why do you write? I guess let's start there.
Yeah, so I think the writing came around where couple things. So, I mean, I'll be honest, it's probably a mix of selfish and selfless reasons, right? As a consultant, I have to network, right? I do have to, I am building a practice. I am helping clients, and, building those relationships is important. And I did feel like writing was an important way to communicate to clients and prospective clients that I am, I have had a wide range of experiences, and I think it's important to share those things and to share those insights. So, I've kind of shifted some of my writing over the years. Now a lot of my communication maybe is a little more, maybe a little less serious than some, but I think that's important to learn too, right? So I try to provide very informative pieces. I do quarterly newsletters as well, kind of along those points to help actuaries in the field maybe learn about something that they don't know about. But I do think just building relationships with people in a selfless way. I really kind of enjoy posting. Like, one of the things I do quite a bit is post jobs for other people, because
Hmm.
I know that, I want the actuarial profession to be strong. Even if I'm not hiring, I want, my friends at some other company to thrive in the actuarial world, because I've always been so happy with, my career in the actuarial world. So a lot of what I post on LinkedIn is just that kind of stuff. It's not even about me or my job. It really is about the field. And I think that's important.
So going back to the articles that you publish, especially on LinkedIn there, like you mentioned the networking benefits, just the dissemination of information. When did you get started writing?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would probably say I started doing my quarterly newsletters maybe about 10 years ago. Okay.
Okay.
And when I do the quarterly newsletters, I typically probably have 3 to 4 main topics. And I usually do, like a 2-pager on each
Hmm.
of those topics. And that could be like a rules change, as I was alluding to earlier in the health world, there's always rules changes. Or it may be I saw someone else post something and I want to have a little view on that as well. So I usually that's kind of how I got started. So, and then now with like LinkedIn, that's obviously a much more expansive way of getting opinions out there and thoughts out there. But I tend to make those a little bit more quick hitters. Now I may
Hmm.
link to something longer or something like that, but a lot of times what I will write there is more like, hey, I saw this article or I saw this. Here's my quick opinion on it. I think you need to go look at this. So again, a lot of it is from the viewpoint of making sure that actuaries kind of see what's going on in the marketplace. And while they may disagree with my view or have a different view from me, that I still think it's informative for them to know about.
So I think a lot of actuaries, they obviously, as you mentioned, they get in the field because they've got an aptitude for math,
Yeah.
and some of them like the business skills aspect of things. Um, for anyone that I don't think writing is necessarily one of the things that actuaries are like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to become an actuary because I want to write about technical stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
what advice do you have for people that maybe want to get into writing more, for whether it's for personal brand reasons or um, to help their company? What advice do you have for somebody that's looking to get started?
Yeah, so I think the simplest advice is just do it and mess up, because it's not, as you said, we may not, as actuaries, may not have the gifted skills of writing like Shakespeare. Right now, I was joking about taking some of the qualities from my father. I should also mention my mother, who was an English teacher for 40 years, and so she did ingrain in me writing. Right, so
Hmm.
that is probably part of kind of my background as well. And I know the staff that work for me aren't always happy when I look at their reports, because I always joke I'm like that 40-year-old English teacher, red inking everything and that kind of stuff. But it's just putting it out there. I think the just that hurdle of doing it is so high. If any actuary can just, I mean, start small. Just do a quick, like I would probably recommend just doing a quick comment or a reaction to someone else's post. You
Hmm.
know, you don't even have to um, think of a independent idea. Just react. Take in what you read from someone else and just do a quick paragraph. Hey, thanks for the idea, but have you thought about this? And then you start kind of building up. And then, somewhat related to that, a recommendation I always had, or I would have for people based on my experiences, is again, when I said, you don't have to create the wheel. One of the things I do is I survey to see what other people are writing about, right? And if there's 5 or 6 people writing about it, maybe other people would want to hear kind of my view on it, even if it's something I have experience with. Like, one of the sources, it's a great resource, is the Health Affairs blog.
Hmm.
There have been multiple authors of that over the years, but they always write about great health stuff. And I will, see something. I'm like, great, I'm going to write about that too. So I think everyone, when I have new staff and I talk about writing a white paper or something, I think they do freak out. One, is the hurdle, and two, they think they have to have an original idea. you don't necessarily have to have an original idea. You've got something to say about a topic that someone else has had something to say.
I think you hit on something that maybe keeps people, holds them back from some of this, which is that fear of failure,
Mhm.
right? That somehow they're going to mess it up. Um, how do you address that? Because that's daunting.
It is daunting. The way I would probably say it, and maybe they'd have to take this on faith, is no one's going to remember that you failed it or screwed it up. This isn't exactly writing, but I remember one of the first times I spoke at an SOA session. Okay. So again, that's, it's similar. You're stepping out of your comfort zone, you're speaking at a session. And I remember I screwed something up big time. And maybe not big time, but
But
I remember.
like said something factually incorrect or fumbled
Yeah,
over
so
your words.
basically
Like,
what happened was I right before the session, I tried to Google a couple things just for confirmation. And turned out that when I Googled it, I got the prior version of a report versus the final version. And so I like quoted something from that report in the session. And of course, like 20 hands go up and they're all like, well, that's wrong. And I'm like, so I got to eat crow a little bit and deal with that. And, in the moment, it's not great. But guess what? I've spoken 900 times at different sessions since then, and no one remembers, or, they kept inviting me back. You just learn from it. I learned my lessons from it. You got to do a little more diligence. Don't try to research something 5 seconds before you go on stage. But it's you just got to have a short memory, because in reality, I think we think people are always going to remember you're a screw up, and they don't remember that stuff.
well, clearly it didn't sink the ship. So
It did not. It did not.
yeah,
That's the thing. I think everyone always thinks when something goes wrong, it's the torpedo right in the middle of the hole, when in reality, it's just probably a little rifle shot that hits the top of the bow and doesn't really do much damage.
no, I think that's great advice, and it's something that especially as people are learning and getting into some of this stuff, you gotta you gotta be able to take the risk,
You
and you
do.
gotta be okay with the fact that it might not go your way. But I think your point is spot on, that it, nobody's going to necessarily remember it either.
Oh,
I doubt we're going to have reactions to these episodes of people saying, "Oh, I was in the room where Dave made that comment
exactly.
and messed it
Yeah.
up."
And one thing I will say too that really helped me with some of those failure things and thinking through it. And while I know there's some exceptions to the rule, I work with a couple actuaries that are exceptions to the rule, but we all fail exams, right? And so I always feel like, and that was somehow I got a little comfortable with it. I was like, I failed plenty of times and I've survived and I got my FSA. It's great. And I think when people, and I've used that analogy before with some of my staff, they're like, yeah, you're right. I overcame adversity with that. You study hard, you work hard, you fail, you're not happy about it, but you pick yourself up and you try again. So I think actuaries are pretty good to do stuff like that, because we've all faced adversity, unless you're the unicorn that's passed every exam with a 10.
Yeah, no kidding. So Dave, thanks. This was great advice. And I really appreciate your perspective on taking those risks, putting stuff out there. For everyone that's listening, join us on our next segment. We're going to talk more about volunteering in the profession and get some of Dave's takes on that.
Thank you.